My Japanese learning journey started really badly, and I had a lot of mental roadblocks that I needed to overcome. As a young 18-year-old, I was so excited for the opportunity to do an 18-month-long homestay in Japan. At that time, I just finished high school and I was ready to embark on a brand new adventure. I bought myself a Japanese phrase book, which I studied on the plane on the way over to Japan. The phrase book was in English with Romanized Japanese, so it was easy for me to read. Before this, I'd never studied Japanese. I flew from Brisbane into Osaka and then took a connecting flight to Takamatsu in Shikoku, and this is where I would stay for the next 18 months. My homestay family was so welcoming at the airport, but I figured out pretty early on that they didn't speak any English. But that's okay, because I was full of confidence and I had my Japanese phrase book and I was sure I'd be right. It was a couple of days into the homestay and I needed to get some batteries for my cassette Walkman because I couldn't bring them over on the plane with me. So I had my phrase book and I studied the things that you had to say to ask the shop assistant for batteries. And I was all ready. I practiced a couple of times before I left home and I went into the shop and I said, "Do you have any batteries?" I got met with the strangest looks of like, "What are you talking about? What is this language you speak?" So I said it again and I was met with the same shocked, confused faces. And I ended up having to open up the Walkman and point to the part where the batteries go in, and then somehow they understood what I was talking about. I felt a little bit disappointed that the phrase book wasn't working. So this same thing happened 2 or 3 more times where I used the phrase book and I tried to say exactly what was written and I was met with confused looks. It didn't matter how slowly or carefully I was saying the words, no one seemed to understand what I was saying or trying to say. Gradually, my initial confidence to speak Japanese just started to diminish and it just got worse and worse to a point where I decided I really couldn't speak Japanese. No matter how hard I tried, it just wasn't working. And I was feeling more and more embarrassed, more and more anxious. And I started to feel a sense of panic every time I had to speak Japanese because it just didn't seem to be working. This panic just kept building as the weeks went by. And in the end, I just really couldn't speak. I literally just stopped talking and I ended up just nodding or shaking my head rather than trying to say words because it was just becoming a major problem for me to speak. This was a huge setback for me and my excitement of coming to Japan had turned into one of feeling anxious and fearful every time I went out and had to communicate with people. My homestay family were doing their best to try and support me, but I think they were also at a loss because they didn't know what to do with this dud Australian that they got that just stopped speaking one day. After about 4 months of me not speaking at all, my homestay father dragged me off to the Takamatsu Cultural Center and he had organized for me to have a tutor. So the tutors at the cultural center were all volunteers and I'd been teed up with a primary school teacher, retired primary school teacher, and she sat me down and basically started teaching me phonics. I was still very reluctant to utter any kind of sounds or words in Japanese, but she started with the basic vowel sounds and wouldn't take no for an answer. And so we started doing a repetition. So she would start with the first 5 vowels, which were a, I, u, e, o, and then I would repeat after her, a, I, u, e, o. And we just did this every lesson for about 2 or 3 weeks. After we'd done the vowel sounds and she was happy I could pronounce the vowels, we moved on to writing the vowel sounds. And we moved from hiragana, which is the first script, to katakana, and then we started on some basic kanji. And she gave me lots of homework and words to practice at home. And then when I went back in, it would just be a repeat after me. So shadowing, they call it here in Japan. So I did a lot of shadowing and practicing saying words with her to get my pronunciation right. But I was still definitely not confident enough to speak to anyone outside of my teacher. She was very, very supportive, but I still didn't have confidence that I could speak to anyone. So I just kept that to myself. So after I'd been in Japan for about 6 months, my cousin Dan from Australia arrived. So it was planned that Dan would come over when he was on his uni break. And when he arrived, my first job was to pick him up and take him to the hotel because my homestay didn't have enough room for him to stay. So I took him into the reception, and the lady at the reception said, "Hitori desu ka?" Is it just one person? And I think I was sort of like doing my nod thing because I still wasn't speaking at that stage. And she'd said something like, 1 bag or 2 bags. And I think I was doing the 1 or 2 with my fingers to respond to her. So we did all of this for the check-in, and then we went up to the room. And my cousin Dan said to me,
"Oh wow, you just speak such good Japanese. Like, when did you learn Japanese? You didn't tell me you could speak Japanese."
And I was like, I didn't say anything. I don't speak Japanese. And he's like,
"Yeah, I saw you. You were talking to the lady at the hotel. You answered all her questions."
I was sort of like, did I speak Japanese? But I didn't actually say anything. But what I realized was I was understanding what she was saying. So I was understanding, and I was able to communicate without words just by nodding and saying 1 or 2. And that was my first start of, okay, maybe I'm getting some of this Japanese, but I'm still not going to speak to anyone. I just can't do that. So obviously my cousin Dan wanted to see Japan, and I had some holidays coming up. So we decided to go to Hiroshima and then off to Disneyland in Tokyo. And suddenly I was in a position where Dan couldn't speak anything at all, and I had some kind of understanding about what was going on. So I had to start organizing things. So the first thing, we're super broke, both of us. I'm a homestay student and he's a uni student. So we decided to catch the bus from Takamatsu over to Hiroshima. We were going to go and stay there 2 nights, and then another bus to Tokyo. But I had to buy the bus tickets. I remember going to the place where they sell the tickets, and I said to the lady at the counter in my very broken Japanese, 2 tickets to Hiroshima, please. And I think she said, would you like this bus or this bus, like which time? And I answered her, because it's not a yes-no question. I suddenly had to say the time. I remember after I bought the tickets, she said to me, "Nihongo jouzu desu ne," which is a compliment saying, "Oh, your Japanese is great." That was the first time anyone had ever said anything to me. It's the first time someone hadn't looked at me with a confused face, like, "What are you saying? I don't understand." It was the first little snippet of confidence that I got with my Japanese speaking. And her comment just meant so much to me because then the rest of the trip, there was no troubles at all. I was able to book buses, get hotels, get from A to B, all obviously in broken Japanese. I'd only been there 6 months at that stage, and I was only speaking in simple words like "to please" and "futatsu kudasai." More and more on that trip, Japanese people were saying to me, "Oh, your Japanese is great." The way people out and about were complimenting me on my language was making my panic and anxiety go down a lot. Even though I was still feeling anxious every time I had to speak, it was becoming less and less of a panic state. So with all those barriers now broken, it sort of paved the way for me to seriously study Japanese and build up my confidence. So after my 18-month-long homestay, I had built enough of a foundation that I could build my language on. And it really did start from the phonics and the sounds of Japanese and learning the hiragana and the katakana. I think if I hadn't built that strong foundation with pronunciation and intonation, I probably would have continued to struggle with people not understanding me. So with that knowledge, after I returned back to Australia, I continued to study Japanese very seriously. And I ended up graduating as a Japanese teacher, a high school Japanese teacher. A couple of my lovely subscribers asked me if I'd be interested in helping them learn Japanese. So it got me to thinking, as a Japanese teacher and someone with the perspective of both being a student of Japanese and a teacher of Japanese, it got me thinking maybe you would be interested in a course in Japanese. If you would be interested in me creating courses for you to study both pronunciation and intonation, and be a guide on the side to your Japanese learning journey, could you let me know in the comments if this would be something you'd be interested in, and I might consider creating a course that people could join. Before we go, I'd like to tell you a funny story about a recent interaction I had at the hardware store. So while I was renovating this house, I needed to buy a spirit level. I don't know what they're called in your country, but in Australia we call them spirit levels, and that's what you use to make sure something's straight. Anyway, I didn't know the word for spirit level, and I arrived at the hardware shop and then realized I didn't know the word for spirit level, and I'd left my phone in the car so I couldn't use my translation app. So I thought, I'm going to have to improvise this, and again that anxiety sort of wells up because you don't know a word. So I waved down one of the Conan workers and I said to him in Japanese, "Oh, I'm looking for that thingy, you know, the thing that measures if things are straight, that thing." And he turned to me and said, "Ah, suiheiki? Suiheiki desu ka?" And in my brain, the word suiheiki popped in because I've been learning kanji. Si is water, hei is like the average, ki is instrument, suiheiki, water average instrument. And I thought in English it's called a spirit level, so it is a suiheiki that I was after. So I was like, "So desu, suiheiki, doko ni arimasu ka?" And then he directed me to it. And then we got to the place where the suiheiki are, and on it, it said in katakana, leberu, which is level. And I could have just said, "Leberu wa doko desu ka?" So yeah, it's a pretty funny story at the time, but I learnt a new word, and I will never forget suiheiki now because it's implanted in my memory, because it was I heard if you have some kind of trauma around a word or a panic feeling, you'll never forget the word, and that's how you learn new words, through trauma. I guess that's how I've learnt new words, through trauma. So I hope that's answered all of your questions about my Japanese language journey and how I came to speak Japanese, and also know that I'm still on the learning journey, and I don't think this journey will ever end, to be honest. If you'd be interested in doing a course with me, please let me know in the comments, or if there's anything in particular that you want to know about Japanese learning, please feel free to ask me those questions in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I've really enjoyed this chat with you, and I hope to talk to you again next time. See you later.